Welcome to Dreamtale Sleep Stories. Tonight's reading is Shadows in the Desert. Settle into your bed or sofa and let your shoulders, jaw, and eyelids grow heavy. Inhale slowly, 1, 2, 3, and sigh the air away, allowing the day to fade into quiet dark. With every soft inhale, you invite fresh English phrases. With every gentle exhale, stray thoughts drift farther off. Behind my voice flows a gentle melody, renowned for guiding the mind toward deep relaxation. Keep your eyes closed or follow the captions, whichever feels right. Simply receive the rhythm and resonance of the language. Deep in rest, tonight's phrases will take root like seeds, ready to bloom into stronger English skills with the morning light. When you feel settled, hold that unhurried breath and allow yourself to drift into the tale. Shadows in the Desert begins now. And when the story's final line has faded, the music will linger a little longer, carrying you gently deeper into sleep. Shadows in the Desert. Hassan had been a merchant for 43 years, and this would be his last great journey across the Nakhla Desert. At 65, his weathered hands still knew how to guide a camel, and his keen eyes could spot a sandstorm hours before it arrived. But his heart was tired, and his bones ached from decades of sleeping under stars and walking on burning sand. The caravan he led consisted of 12 camels, 8 men, and cargo worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. Silk from the eastern kingdoms, precious spices from the southern islands, and most valuable of all, a collection of rare gems that would make Hassan wealthy enough to retire in comfort. This final trade would secure not only his future, but also provide dowries for his 3 daughters and establish his sons in their own businesses. His traveling companions were men he had worked with before, though not all of them for long periods. There was Malik, his oldest friend and most trusted advisor, who had been with Hassan for over 20 years. Omar, a skilled navigator who could read the stars like others read books. Rashid, a young but promising trader eager to learn the business. Farid, a quiet man who handled the camels with remarkable skill. Khalil, a former soldier who served as their guard. Yusuf, a cook whose meals could lift spirits even in the harshest conditions. Tariq, a storyteller who kept morale high during long evenings. And finally, Saeed, a newcomer recommended by another merchant in the last city. The first 3 days of their journey passed without incident. They traveled during the cooler hours of dawn and dusk, resting during the scorching midday heat. The familiar rhythm of desert travel settled over them. The soft padding of camel feet on sand, the gentle jingling of bells, the occasional call between riders, and always the vast silence of the desert surrounding them. On the 4th morning, Hassan noticed something troubling. One of the sacks, containing the most valuable spices, seemed lighter than it should be. When he examined it more carefully during their midday rest, he discovered that a significant portion of the contents was missing. The sack had been carefully resealed, but Hassan's experienced eye could detect the subtle signs of tampering. He said nothing to the group, but his mind began working. Someone in his caravan was stealing from him. The thought felt like a knife in his heart. In 43 years of trading, he had always prided himself on choosing trustworthy companions. His reputation was built on integrity, and the men who traveled with him were supposed to share that value. That evening, as the men gathered around their small fire, Hassan watched each face carefully. Malik was telling a story about their early trading days, his weathered face animated in the firelight. Omar studied his star charts, occasionally pointing out constellations to Rashid, who listened with eager attention. Farid tended to the camels, speaking to them in the gentle tones he always used. Khalil kept watch at the edge of their camp, his soldiers' instincts never relaxing, even in the company of friends. Yusuf stirred a pot of stew, the aroma making everyone's mouth water after a long day of travel. Tariq worked on repairing a bridle, his fingers nimble despite the dim light. And Saeed sat slightly apart from the others, cleaning his dagger with careful, methodical strokes. Which one of them was the thief? The next day brought new challenges. The wind picked up, carrying stinging sand that forced them to cover their faces and slow their pace. Visibility dropped to mere yards, and Omar had to rely on his compass and years of experience to keep them on course. In such conditions, it would be easy for someone to access the cargo without being seen. During their afternoon rest, Hassan made another disturbing discovery. This time, it was a small bag of the precious gems that had been tampered with. 3 stones were missing, not enough to be immediately obvious, but valuable enough to feed a family for months. Hassan's hands trembled with anger as he resealed the bag. The thief was growing bolder. That evening, Hassan decided to confide in Malik. His old friend listened gravely as Hassan described his discoveries. "Are you certain?" Malik asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the desert wind. "I've been doing this for over 4 decades," Hassan replied. "I know my cargo better than I know my own children's faces." Malik stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet, but I need to find out who it is before we lose anything else. More importantly, I need to understand why. Is it simple greed, or is there something more planned about this? Could it be bandits following us? Someone taking things at night while we sleep?" Hassan shook his head. "The sacks are sealed with my personal mark. Only someone familiar with how I pack and seal cargo could do this so carefully. It's someone in our group." The thought hung between them like a dark cloud. Both men had known and trusted these companions for varying lengths of time. The idea that one of them would betray Hassan's trust was deeply painful. The next morning brought a new crisis that temporarily pushed Hassan's concerns about the thief to the background. Omar approached him with worry etched on his face. "Hassan, we have a problem. The wind yesterday blew us further west than I realized. We're not on our usual route anymore." Hassan felt his stomach drop. Being lost in the Nakhla Desert was potentially fatal. "How far off course are we?" "I'm not entirely sure. The sandstorm yesterday made it impossible to take proper readings. I think we're about a day's journey west of where we should be. Can you get us back on track?" Omar nodded, but his confidence seemed shaken. "Yes, but it will take an extra 2 days of travel, and we'll need to be more careful with our water." Hassan called the group together and explained the situation. He watched their faces carefully, looking for any sign that someone was secretly pleased by this development. A delay would give a thief more opportunities, and if someone was working with outside accomplices, being off their expected route might be part of a larger plan. The men received the news with the stoic acceptance that came from years of desert travel. Dangers and delays were part of the business. But Hassan noticed that Saeed asked several detailed questions about their new route and how long the delay would last. Was this normal concern, or was he gathering information for some other purpose? That night, Hassan decided to test his suspicions. He announced that he would be checking all the cargo before they continued their journey in the morning. He made this announcement loudly enough for everyone to hear, then watched for reactions. Most of the men nodded approvingly. They all understood the importance of maintaining accurate inventory. But Hassan thought he saw something flicker across Saeed's face. Just for a moment, that might have been fear or worry. Unable to sleep, Hassan rose in the early hours before dawn to actually conduct his inventory. What he found made his blood run cold. During the night, someone had again accessed the cargo. This time, they had taken a valuable silk cloth and replaced some of the premium spices with common ones that looked similar but were worth a fraction of the price. The thief was becoming more sophisticated and more bold. Worse, they seemed to know exactly which items were most valuable and easiest to replace with cheaper alternatives. This suggested someone with considerable knowledge of the trade, not a simple opportunist, but someone who understood the business well. As the other men began to wake and prepare for the day's travel, Hassan made a decision. He would set a trap. During their morning meal, Hassan made another announcement. "I've been thinking about our situation," he said, his voice carrying clearly across their small camp. "Given the delay and the extra risks we're facing, I've decided to offer a bonus to everyone when we complete this journey successfully. Each man will receive an additional gold piece beyond our usual payment." The announcement was met with smiles and expressions of gratitude. But Hassan was watching for something else. He was watching to see who seemed most interested in the details of when and how this bonus would be paid. Later that morning, as they prepared to resume their journey, Hassan quietly asked Malik to help him with a special task. Together, they prepared a small, easily portable package containing some genuinely valuable items, but nothing irreplaceable. They made sure this package was visible and appeared to be carelessly secured. "If our thief takes this bait," Hassan explained to Malik, "we'll know for certain who we're dealing with." The day's travel was particularly difficult. The sun seemed more merciless than usual, and the sand was soft and deep, making every step an effort for both men and camels. They stopped frequently to rest the animals and drink small sips of precious water. During one of these rest stops, Hassan noticed Khalil and Saeed having an intense, whispered conversation some distance from the group. When they saw Hassan looking in their direction, they quickly separated and rejoined the others. Hassan's suspicions began to crystallize around Saeed. The man was newest to their group, which made him an obvious suspect. But more than that, there were small things. The way he asked detailed questions about their route and cargo, how he seemed to know more about the value of different trade goods than he had initially let on, and now this secretive conversation with Khalil. But Hassan was troubled by the involvement of Khalil. The former soldier had traveled with Hassan many times over the past 5 years. He had always seemed honest and reliable. Could Saeed have somehow corrupted him? Or was Hassan's suspicion misplaced? As the afternoon wore on, the heat became almost unbearable. Even the experienced desert travelers were struggling. It was during this difficult period that Hassan made his most disturbing discovery yet. While adjusting the load on one of the camels, he found that his personal water reserve, an emergency supply he always kept separate from the common stores, had been accessed. Someone had taken nearly half of it and carefully disguised the theft by adding sand to the container to maintain its weight. This was no longer just about money. In the desert, stealing water was potentially equivalent to murder. Hassan felt a cold fury building inside him. Whoever was doing this was willing to risk not just his financial security, but potentially his life. That evening, Hassan called Malik aside again. "It's escalated beyond simple theft," he said grimly. "Someone took water from my emergency reserve." Malik's face darkened. "That's a death sentence in this heat." "I know, and it means our thief is either more desperate or more ruthless than I initially thought. What do you want to do?" Hassan was quiet for a long moment, listening to the familiar sounds of the evening camp. Men tending to camels, preparing food, checking equipment. These sounds had been the backdrop of his life for over 4 decades. The thought that one of these men he had trusted, men he had shared countless meals and dangers with, was betraying him so completely was almost unbearable. "Tomorrow night, we'll keep watches," Hassan decided. "We'll tell everyone it's because we're in unfamiliar territory and need to be more careful about bandits. But really, we'll be watching our own people." The next day brought them to a series of rocky outcroppings that provided some relief from the sun and wind. It was the kind of terrain that Hassan normally enjoyed. The rocks created interesting shadows and offered protection from sandstorms. But today, he found himself wondering if the complex landscape would provide more opportunities for the thief to operate undetected. During their midday rest in the shade of a large boulder, Omar approached Hassan with troubling news. "I've been recalculating our position," the navigator said quietly. "We're making slower progress than I hoped. The soft sand yesterday and the heat today have slowed us down significantly." "How much of a delay are we looking at?" "At least 3 additional days, possibly 4. Hassan felt the weight of this news settling on his shoulders. More days meant more opportunities for theft, more strain on their water supplies, and more risk of the kind of desperation that could turn theft into violence. It was that afternoon that Hassan's carefully prepared trap finally yielded results. During a brief stop to rest the camels, he noticed that his bait package had been disturbed. Someone had carefully opened it, taken some of the contents, and resealed it almost perfectly. But Hassan's experienced eye caught the subtle differences in how the package was tied. More importantly, he had marked the contents in a way that would be invisible to a casual observer, but obvious to him. Several items were missing, and others had been rearranged. Now came the difficult task of determining who had accessed the package. Hassan fought back over the day's travel, trying to remember who had been near that particular camel and when. The soft sand made tracking footprints impossible, and the constant movement of the group made it difficult to establish who had opportunity. That evening, Hassan implemented his plan for keeping watches. He announced that due to their isolation and the valuable cargo they carried, they would post guards throughout the night. "We'll work in pairs," Hassan explained. "Malik and I will take the first watch, Omar and Rashid the second, Farid and Khalil the third, and Yusuf and Tariq the fourth. Saeed, you'll float between watches to provide relief as needed." Hassan watched carefully as he made these assignments. Most of the men simply nodded their acceptance, but he thought he saw a flicker of concern cross Saeed's face when he learned he wouldn't have a regular partner for the watch schedule. The first part of the night passed quietly. Hassan and Malik positioned themselves where they could observe both the perimeter of their camp and the cargo area. The desert night was surprisingly cold after the blazing heat of the day, and Hassan pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders. "Do you really think someone will try something tonight?" Malik whispered. "I don't know," Hassan replied, "but if they do, we'll be ready." During the second watch, Omar and Rashid reported nothing unusual. The young trader seemed honored to be paired with the experienced navigator, and Hassan could hear them having quiet conversations about reading the stars and predicting weather patterns. It was during the third watch that things became interesting. Hassan was pretending to sleep, but actually listening carefully to the sounds around the camp. Farid and Khalil were supposed to be watching together, but Hassan noticed that for long periods, he could only hear one set of footsteps patrolling around the camp. Where was the other guard? Hassan waited patiently, controlling his breathing to appear deeply asleep. After what felt like an hour, he heard soft footsteps approaching the cargo area. Someone was moving very carefully, trying not to wake the sleeping men. Through barely opened eyes, Hassan saw a dark figure near the camels. The person moved with familiarity, clearly knowing exactly where to find what they wanted. Hassan watched as the figure carefully opened one of the cargo bundles, removed something, and just as carefully resealed it. When the figure turned to move away, a shaft of moonlight briefly illuminated the person's face. Hassan's heart sank as he recognized Khalil, the former soldier he had trusted for 5 years. But Hassan's shock was not yet complete. As Khalil moved away from the cargo, another figure emerged from behind the rocks at the edge of their camp. It was Saeed. The two men met briefly, and Hassan saw Khalil hand something to Saeed before they separated and returned to their respective positions. So there were two thieves working together. That explained how they had been able to operate so successfully. One could create distractions or serve as a lookout, while the other accessed the cargo. Hassan lay still for the remainder of the night, his mind racing. How long had this partnership been going on? Had Khalil been stealing from him during previous journeys? Or was this something new? And what was their ultimate plan? Were they simply planning to disappear with their stolen goods when they reached their destination? Or was there something more sinister involved? The next morning brought a new challenge that temporarily overshadowed even Hassan's discovery of the thieves' identities. Yusuf, the cook, approached Hassan with a worried expression. "Hassan, we have a problem with the water. We're using it faster than we should be." Hassan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. "How much do we have left?" "At our current rate of consumption, perhaps 4 days. But if we're careful and reduce our rations, we might stretch it to 6 days." "And how long until we reach water?" "According to Omar, at least 5 days, possibly 7, if we continue to have difficult travel conditions." Hassan closed his eyes and tried to calculate. Even in the best-case scenario, they would be cutting it very close. And this was assuming no one continued to steal from their water supplies. Hassan made a difficult decision. He called the group together and explained their water situation honestly. "We need to reduce our water consumption immediately," he announced. "Each man will receive a smaller ration until we reach the next well. I know this is difficult, but it's necessary for our survival." The men received this news with the grim understanding that came from experience. They all knew the dangers of the desert, and they all knew that water discipline could mean the difference between life and death. But Hassan was watching Khalil and Saeed carefully as he made this announcement. He was looking for any sign that they understood the full implications of their water theft. Taking water from the group's supplies wasn't just theft. In their current situation, it could doom the entire caravan. That afternoon, as they traveled through a particularly desolate stretch of desert, Hassan made his move. He quietly informed Malik of what he had witnessed the night before, and together they developed a plan. During their midday rest, Hassan made an announcement. "I've decided to reorganize our cargo to distribute weight more evenly among the camels. I'll need everyone's help with this task." What Hassan actually intended was to conduct a thorough search of everyone's personal belongings while they were distracted with moving cargo. It was a risky move. If he was wrong about Khalil and Saeed, he would damage relationships with men he had trusted for years. But if he was right, he needed to understand the full scope of their theft and plan. As the men worked to move and reorganize the cargo bundles, Hassan and Malik systematically searched through personal packs and saddlebags. Most contained exactly what Hassan expected: personal clothing, small tools, a few personal treasures that men carry when they travel far from home. But in Saeed's pack, Hassan found items that made his blood boil. There were spices that had clearly been taken from Hassan's cargo, several small gems, and most damning of all, a detailed map showing their route with notations in Saeed's handwriting. The map showed not just where they were going, but specific locations where the group would be most vulnerable to attack. In Khalil's belongings, Hassan found additional stolen goods and something even more troubling. A letter written in a script Hassan didn't recognize, but with numbers and what appeared to be location markers that corresponded to points on Saeed's map. The implications hit Hassan like a physical blow. This wasn't just theft. It was something much more organized and dangerous. Saeed and Khalil weren't just stealing cargo. They were apparently planning to lead the entire caravan into a trap where accomplices could rob them completely. Hassan's hand shook as he shared these discoveries with Malik. His old friend's face grew pale as he examined the evidence. "What do we do now?" Malik whispered. Hassan looked out at the desert surrounding them, then back at the group of men working to reorganize the cargo. Two of them were traitors planning to betray not just him, but all of their companions. The thought of Rashid, eager and trusting, or Omar, who had navigated for them faithfully for years, being led into an ambush, made Hassan's stomach turn. "We have to be very careful," Hassan said quietly. "If they realize we know, they might act immediately. But we can't continue on their planned route. Can we change course without making it obvious?" Hassan thought about this. "Omar is our navigator. If I can convince him privately that we need to alter our route for some other reason, he can guide us away from whatever trap they've set. But I need to do it in a way that doesn't alert Khalil and Saeed." That evening, Hassan found an opportunity to speak privately with Omar. He told the navigator that he had heard rumors of bandit activity along their planned route and wanted to take a more circuitous path to their destination. Omar was surprised by this request. "It will add at least 2 days to our journey, Hassan. And with our water situation..." "I know it's risky," Hassan replied, "but I have a feeling about this. Something doesn't feel right about continuing on our current path." Omar studied Hassan's face in the flickering firelight. After many years of traveling together, the navigator had learned to trust Hassan's instincts. "If that's what you want, I can plot a new course, but we'll need to be very careful with our water consumption." "I understand. Can you make the course change gradually so it's not obvious that we're deliberately avoiding our original route?" Omar nodded slowly. "Yes, I think I can do that." The next morning, Omar announced that based on his star readings, he wanted to adjust their course slightly to take advantage of more favorable terrain. To Hassan's relief, Khalil and Saeed seemed to accept this explanation without suspicion. But as the day progressed, Hassan noticed that Saeed was paying unusual attention to their direction of travel. The man kept glancing at the sun and occasionally pulling out a small compass. Was he trying to verify their course against his map? During their midday rest, Hassan saw Saeed and Khalil having another whispered conversation. This time, both men looked worried. Hassan wondered if they were beginning to realize that the caravan was no longer following the route they had planned. That afternoon brought a new crisis. Farid, who had been responsible for caring for the camels, approached Hassan with disturbing news. "One of the camels is sick," Farid reported. "She's been drinking more water than usual and seems weak. I'm worried she might not be able to continue carrying her full load." Hassan examined the animal himself. The camel did indeed seem unwell. though Hassan couldn't determine what was wrong with her. In their current situation, losing a camel could be catastrophic. They would have to redistribute her cargo among the remaining animals, slowing their progress even further. But as Hassan studied the sick camel, a suspicious thought occurred to him. Could someone have deliberately made the animal ill? If Khalil and Saeed realized that the caravan was no longer following their planned route, they might be looking for ways to slow their progress or force them back toward the original path. Hassan decided to voice his concerns to Malik. His old friend listened grimly as Hassan explained his suspicions. "You think they poisoned the camel?" "I don't know, but the timing seems suspicious. And if they're working with accomplices who are waiting at specific locations, they might be getting desperate to keep us on schedule and en route." As they discussed what to do about the sick camel, Hassan noticed that Khalil was approaching them. The former soldier's expression was more serious than usual. "Hassan, I need to speak with you privately," Khalil said. Hassan felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his expression neutral. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Khalil glanced around to make sure no one else was within hearing distance. "I'm concerned about our water situation, and with the sick camel, we're facing even more delays. I think we need to consider abandoning some of the less valuable cargo to lighten our load and increase our speed." Hassan studied Khalil's face carefully. Was this genuine concern, or was the man trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage? "What specifically do you think we should abandon?" Hassan asked. "Some of the heavier trade goods. The items that are valuable but not essential for our survival." Hassan realized that Khalil was essentially asking him to abandon the very items that made this journey profitable. If they left behind the valuable cargo, Khalil and Saeed could return later to retrieve it, or direct their accomplices to its location. "I appreciate your concern," Hassan said carefully, "but I think we can manage for now. Let's see how the camel does tomorrow before we make any drastic decisions." Khalil nodded, but Hassan could see disappointment in his eyes. The man had hoped to convince Hassan to abandon the cargo, making their job easier. That night, Hassan implemented an even more careful watch schedule. He arranged for men he trusted completely, Malik, Omar, and Rashid, to keep watch while he observed from concealment. If Khalil and Saeed were planning to make a move, Hassan wanted to be ready. The first part of the night passed quietly, but during the second watch, Hassan saw movement that confirmed his worst fears. Khalil and Saeed met near the cargo area, and this time their conversation was more animated. Hassan couldn't hear their words, but their body language suggested disagreement or frustration. After several minutes of discussion, Hassan saw Saeed pull out what appeared to be a small mirror. He angled it toward the southeast and flashed it several times, creating brief reflections of moonlight. Hassan's blood ran cold. Saeed was signaling to someone. Their accomplices were out there in the desert, probably following the caravan and waiting for the right moment to attack. Hassan waited until Khalil and Saeed had returned to their positions, then quietly woke Malik and Omar. In whispered tones, he explained what he had witnessed. "We're being followed," Hassan concluded, "and Khalil and Saeed are communicating with whoever is out there." Omar's face was grim. "What do you want to do?" We need to change our plans completely. How far are we from the old trading post at Kadesh Spring? Omar thought for a moment. About a day and a half southeast of here. But that's not on our route to... I know, Hassan interrupted. There are usually other travelers there, and sometimes a small garrison of soldiers. If we can reach it, we'll have help dealing with whatever is following us. That means completely abandoning our original destination and route, Malik pointed out. Better to arrive somewhere safe than not arrive anywhere at all, Hassan replied. They spent the rest of the night planning their new route and strategy. Hassan would announce in the morning that they were changing course due to the sick camel and water concerns. He would say that he had decided to seek help at Kadesh Spring rather than risk continuing across the open desert with a reduced caravan. When morning came, Hassan made his announcement to the group. Most of the men accepted this change of plans readily. After all, safety was more important than maintaining their original schedule. But Hassan watched Khalil and Saeed carefully as he explained the new route. Both men looked troubled by this development, confirming Hassan's suspicions. They had been leading the caravan toward a specific location where their accomplices were waiting, and now that plan was falling apart. As they prepared to break camp and head toward Kadesh Spring, Hassan noticed that Saeed was having difficulty with his camel. The animal seemed agitated and uncooperative, which was unusual given Saeed's generally good handling of his mount. Hassan approached to offer assistance, and as he got closer, he realized what was wrong. Saeed's camel was loaded differently than usual. There were additional bundles tied to its saddle that Hassan didn't recognize. "What are those packages?" Hassan asked, pointing to the extra bundles. Saeed looked uncomfortable. "Just some personal supplies I reorganized last night." But Hassan's trained eye could see that the bundles contained goods that didn't belong to Saeed. The man had been collecting stolen items and was probably planning to disappear with them when the opportunity arose. Hassan decided it was time to act. He couldn't allow this charade to continue any longer, especially knowing that they were being followed by accomplices who might attack at any moment. "Saeed," Hassan said, in a voice loud enough for the entire group to hear, "I need you to open those bundles so I can verify their contents." Saeed's face went pale. "Hassan, I don't understand. These are my personal belongings. Then you won't mind showing everyone what's inside." The tension in the camp was suddenly palpable. The other men stopped their preparations and turned to watch this confrontation. Khalil was standing near his camel, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. Hassan realized that this moment could determine whether they survived the next few hours. If he was wrong about Khalil and Saeed, he was about to destroy relationships with men he had trusted. But if he was right, confronting them now might be their only chance to prevent a carefully planned betrayal. "I'm waiting," Hassan said firmly. Saeed looked around, desperately, perhaps hoping that Khalil would create some kind of distraction. But Hassan had positioned himself where he could watch both men simultaneously. "I can explain," Saeed began. "Then explain," Hassan replied. Instead of explaining, Saeed suddenly lunged toward his camel, grabbing for something tied to the saddle. Hassan reacted instinctively, tackling the younger man before he could reach whatever he was aiming for. As Hassan and Saeed struggled in the sand, Khalil drew his sword and started toward them. But Malik, who had been watching carefully, intercepted the former soldier. "Don't make this worse than it already is," Malik warned, his own hand on his weapon. The other men watched in shock as the confrontation unfolded. Rashid looked confused and frightened. Omar stood ready to help however he could. Farid continued holding his camel's reins, but his attention was completely focused on the fight. Yusuf and Tariq moved closer together, uncertain what was happening, but ready to defend themselves if necessary. Hassan managed to pin Saeed to the ground and retrieve what the man had been reaching for. It was a curved dagger, longer and more wicked-looking than the simple knives most travelers carried. "Search his bundles," Hassan called to Omar, while maintaining his hold on Saeed. Omar quickly opened the bundles tied to Saeed's camel. Inside, he found not only goods that had clearly been stolen from Hassan's cargo, but also additional weapons and what appeared to be detailed plans written in the same script Hassan had found in Khalil's belongings. "There are enough weapons here to arm several men," Omar reported. "And these papers, they show our route and what looks like planned attack positions." The reality of their situation was now clear to everyone. Khalil and Saeed had been planning to lead them into an ambush. The theft had been only part of a larger plan to rob the entire caravan. Khalil, realizing that their plan had been exposed, made a desperate decision. He broke away from Malik and ran toward the rocky outcroppings at the edge of their camp. Hassan understood immediately what the man was doing. He was going to signal their accomplices to attack now, before the caravan could reach the safety of Kadesh Spring. "Stop him!" Hassan shouted. Omar and Rashid gave chase, but Khalil had a head start and knew exactly where he was going. Hassan saw him reach a high point among the rocks and begin flashing signals with his sword, using the reflection of sunlight to communicate across the desert. Within minutes, Hassan could see answering signals from multiple points around their camp. They were surrounded. "Everyone gather the camels in the center," Hassan ordered. "Prepare to defend ourselves." The men moved quickly to create a defensive position among the rocks. Hassan estimated that they had perhaps 10 or 15 minutes before the attackers arrived. It wasn't much time, but they had some advantages. They were in a strong defensive position. They knew an attack was coming, and they had eliminated 2 potential threats from within their own group. Saeed was still struggling against Hassan's grip. "You don't understand," he gasped. "There are 20 of them out there. You can't fight them all." "Then why don't you call them off?" Hassan replied grimly. "It's too late for that. Khalil has already given the signal." Hassan looked up at the rocks where Khalil had disappeared. The former soldier was no longer visible, but Hassan assumed he was either coming down to join the attack or had found a position where he could provide support to their accomplices. "How long have you been planning this?" Hassan asked Saeed. "Since we left the last city," Saeed admitted. "Khalil approached me there. He said you were carrying enough wealth to make us all rich if we were willing to take it. And you were willing to kill for it?" Saeed's face was pale, but his expression was defiant. We weren't planning to kill anyone. The plan was to wait until you were asleep, then signal the others to surround the camp. You would surrender the cargo rather than fight against impossible odds. And what about the water you stole? Did you think that wouldn't kill us? For the first time, Saeed looked genuinely ashamed. That wasn't part of the original plan. Khalil said we needed to weaken you, make you more desperate and less likely to fight. Hassan felt disgusted by the casual way Saeed discussed their planned betrayal. These men had been willing to risk the lives of the entire caravan for personal gain. But there was no time to dwell on the betrayal. Hassan could now see dust clouds rising in multiple directions around their position. The attackers were closing in. Malik, Hassan called, take charge of positioning our defenses. Omar, you and Rashid watch the eastern approach. Farid, Yusuf, and Tariq take the western side. I'll handle the north. As the men took their positions, Hassan made a quick inventory of their weapons and supplies. They had the element of surprise working in their favor. The attackers probably expected to find a sleeping camp, not a prepared defense. They also had good positions among the rocks that would provide cover and make it difficult for mounted attackers to reach them. But they were outnumbered at least 2 to 1, and Hassan didn't know how well armed their opponents were. The first attack came from the south, where the terrain was most open. Hassan counted 8 riders approaching at full gallop, whooping and brandishing curved swords. They were clearly expecting to find easy prey. Instead, they rode into a hail of arrows and crossbow bolts from defenders who had prepared positions and clear fields of fire. 3 of the attackers fell immediately, and the others were forced to retreat and regroup. First blood to us, Malik called grimly. But Hassan knew this was just the beginning. The attackers would be more cautious now, and they had enough men to probe different approaches simultaneously. The second attack was more coordinated. Groups of riders approached from 3 directions at once, forcing Hassan's men to divide their attention and their fire. This time, the attackers made it closer to the defensive positions before being driven back. During the brief lull that followed, Hassan heard Khalil's voice calling from somewhere in the rocks above them. Hassan, you can't hold out forever. Surrender the cargo now, and we'll let you and your men leave with your lives. Hassan didn't bother to respond. He knew that Khalil's promise was worthless. Men who would steal water in the desert and lead their companions into an ambush couldn't be trusted to honor any agreement. Instead, Hassan focused on assessing their situation. They had held off 2 attacks, but their supply of arrows and crossbow bolts was limited. More importantly, the attackers were learning about their defenses and would adapt their strategy accordingly. The third attack confirmed Hassan's fears. This time, silence, undecided. Some of the attackers dismounted and approached on foot, using the rocky terrain for cover. Meanwhile, mounted riders created a distraction from another direction. The fighting was fierce and close. Hassan found himself engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a bandit who had managed to reach their defensive line. The man was younger and stronger than Hassan, but the veteran merchant had experience and desperation on his side. When the attack was finally repelled, Hassan realized that Rashid had been wounded. The young trader had taken a sword cut on his arm and was bleeding heavily. "How bad is it?" Hassan asked, as Yusuf tended to the wound. "Not fatal," Yusuf replied, "but he won't be able to use a bow effectively." Hassan looked around at his remaining defenders. They were all showing signs of fatigue, and their ammunition was running low. He estimated they might be able to repel one more major attack, but after that, they would be reduced to fighting with swords and knives at close quarters. It was then that Hassan heard something that made his heart leap with hope. The sound of horns in the distance. Multiple horns, blown in the distinctive pattern used by the desert patrol units that operated out of Kadesh Spring. The attackers heard the horns too, and Hassan could see confusion and fear spreading through their ranks. They had expected to overwhelm a small merchant caravan, not to find themselves caught between prepared defenders and an approaching military unit. Khalil's voice rang out again from the rocks above, but this time he was shouting orders to retreat. The remaining bandits began pulling back, gathering their wounded and preparing to flee. Within minutes, the first soldiers of the Desert Patrol came into view. Hassan counted at least 30 mounted men, all well-armed and experienced in desert warfare. The bandits had no chance against such a force and knew it. As the patrol soldiers secured the area and tended to the wounded, Hassan finally allowed himself to relax. They had survived the ambush, but the betrayal by Khalil and Saeed still hurt deeply. The patrol captain, a weathered man named Captain Azim, listened to Hassan's account of events with growing anger. "We've been tracking this bandit group for weeks," Captain Azim explained. "They've attacked 3 other caravans in the past month. But this is the first time we've found evidence of accomplices working from within a merchant group." Hassan looked at Saeed, who was now bound and under guard. "What will happen to them?" "Khalil escaped into the rocks, but we'll track him down. As for this one," Captain Azim gestured towards Saeed, "he'll face trial for banditry and betrayal of trust. In the desert, those are capital crimes." Hassan felt no satisfaction in Saeed's fate. The man had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. Over the next few hours, as the immediate crisis passed, Hassan had time to reflect on what had happened. In 43 years of trading, he had prided himself on being a good judge of character. The fact that he had been so thoroughly deceived by Khalil, a man he had trusted for 5 years, was deeply troubling. But as he thought about it more, Hassan realized that there had been signs he should have noticed. Khalil had always been curious about the details of their cargo and routes. He had volunteered for watch duties that would give him access to the goods they carried. And he had been the one to recommend Saeed as a banditry of their group. Hassan had ignored these signs because he wanted to trust his companions. The desert was a harsh and dangerous place, and the bonds between men who traveled together were often the difference between life and death. But his desire to maintain those bonds had blinded him to the reality of betrayal. Captain Azim approached Hassan as the patrol was preparing to escort them to Kadesh Spring. "You handled this situation well," the captain said. "Many merchants would have panicked or made mistakes that got their entire caravan killed." "I almost did make mistakes," Hassan replied. "I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it." Trust is necessary in this business, but so is vigilance. You learned that balance today. As they prepared to resume their journey under military escort, Hassan made a decision about his future. This would indeed be his last great trading expedition, but not for the reasons he had originally planned. The betrayal by Khalil and Saeed had shown him that the world of desert trading was changing, becoming more dangerous and less honorable than it had been in his youth. But he had also learned something else. When faced with real danger, his remaining companions, Malik, Omar, Rashid, Farid, Yusuf, and Tariq, had all proven themselves to be truly trustworthy. They had fought bravely to defend not just Hassan's cargo, but each other's lives. That kind of loyalty was rare and precious. 3 days later, they reached the safety of Kadesh Spring. Hassan's cargo was intact, minus only the items that Khalil and Saeed had stolen. The trade goods would still fetch a good price when they reached their final destination. But Hassan's perspective on the journey's success had changed. The real treasure wasn't the silk and spices and gems they carried. It was the knowledge of who could be trusted when everything was at stake. As Hassan sat by the spring that evening, watching his remaining companions share a meal and tend to their equipment, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The shadows in the desert had revealed not just hidden enemies, but also true friends. His last great journey across the Nakhla Desert would be remembered not for the cargo he carried or the profit he made, but for the lesson he learned about the difference between apparent loyalty and real trust. In the end, that lesson was worth more than all the gems and spices in his caravan. The next morning, Hassan began planning the route for the final leg of their journey. There would be no more shadows following them, no more questions about who could be trusted. The desert stretched ahead, vast and challenging as always, but Hassan faced it with companions he knew would stand by him no matter what dangers they encountered. His 43 years as a merchant were ending, but his understanding of honor and friendship in the harsh beauty of the desert had never been clearer.